The snow had already buried 3 bodies that week, 2 men and 1 child. And it was only Tuesday. No one in the canyon could remember a wind like this. A wind that didn't just howl, but hunted. It seeped through the cracks in window frames like fingers searching for skin. It peeled back shingles, found every forgotten knothole, and turned wooden walls into sieves for cold. Square cabins groaned, logs snapped, doors blew open with screams, but the round cabin on the ridge held still, tight. It looked wrong, foolish even. No corners, no edges, just a squat, low circle of stacked stone and clay. Roof like a shallow bowl of bark shingles, with a bone chimney spouting steam instead of smoke. Inside, a single woman with tired eyes and 3 children, none yet 10, sat in warmth that didn't waver. Her name was Cora Yates, and the men in town had said she'd lost her mind long before she lost her husband. They said it when she refused their timber. They said it when she turned down the square blueprints, when she paid an old Apache to show her how his mother packed clay and grass between sandstone. Now they didn't say much at all. The mother they'd pitied had turned her back to the wind and dared it to take her. Cora had built that round cabin in the summer, under a sun so cruel it split lips and left calluses bleeding. She worked while still mourning, belly full of grief and arms full of baby. The boy had come in May, Samson, but the father, Elias, hadn't seen him. Fever took him in February. The cabin was the last argument Cora would have with the world. She chose the place not for the view, but for the way the wind moved there. Didn't move. A low saddle between 2 rock shoulders, protected on 3 sides. She cleared it with a mule and her own hands, flattened it with a tamper made from a stump and a wagon axle. When the preacher came by with cedar planks and neighbor men ready to frame, she waved them off with a mud-coated palm. "It's not how it's supposed to be done," Reverend Mathers warned gently. "Corners let you brace, squares sturdy, reliable." "I'm not building to impress geometry," she said. "I'm building to hold in heat." No one understood, so they laughed behind her back and waited for her to freeze by December. But December came with knives in its breath, and Cora's cabin stood warm. It wasn't just the shape, though, that helped. There was something about the way she'd built it. Tight, packed, no wasted air. The walls weren't logs, but stone and clay, stacked in smooth curves, so the wind couldn't catch on corners. Her roof sagged low and round, like a bowl turned upside down, and it shed snow instead of holding it. She buried the base of the walls in earth, dug a shallow ring around the outer edge to drain melt, and lined the whole bottom perimeter with river rock that soaked in sun all day and bled heat back at night. And then there was the stove, not cast iron, not from town. She built it herself from the same stone, right into the center of the floor, a round mass of fire brick and baked clay that never went out, even when the flame inside died. The warmth held like coals in a pit, the whole stove glowing with a low, steady heat that reached every part of the room evenly. No corners meant no heat traps, no shadows. The air moved in slow, gentle circles. Her children slept under one blanket and didn't shiver. The first to ask for help was Martha Keene. Her boy had frostbite on 3 fingers, and the milk froze before it reached the cup. Her husband wouldn't admit it, but the wood pile was low and the fire was failing. They'd stuffed sacks into the window gaps, but the wind just laughed. Martha came up the ridge with eyes swollen from the cold, holding a cloth full of biscuits in stiff fingers. "I didn't come to beg," she said. "Just want to know what you did different, what you did right." Cora didn't answer at first. She took the biscuits and split one, gave half to her oldest girl, Nora, who hadn't tasted bread in weeks. "You laughed when I hauled river rock," Cora said. "I was wrong. You said I was building a hog circle." "I was wrong, Cora, please." Cora sighed, rose from her stool, and moved aside to show the stove. She didn't explain, just let the woman feel the warmth rising from the stone with her own chapped hands. "That rock's still warm from 2 nights ago," Cora said. "Even after the fire's gone out, heat moves in curves, cold gets caught in corners." By January, 4 families had visited Cora's round house. One tried to copy her, built a round lean-to from scrap and tar. It collapsed in the 3rd storm. Another asked to borrow her stove design. Cora gave them instructions, even lent them her last sack of fire brick. They tried to build it square, and the heat never held. Then came the night when the Griggs' cabin burned. It had been their own stove, a potbelly too close to the wall. The wind snuck in, fanned it, and by morning there was nothing left but charred logs and 4 blackened beams in snow. 3 children died. That night, without knocking, Thomas Griggs came up the ridge carrying his last child. a girl of 7, barefoot, fevered, wrapped in burlap. He said nothing, just knelt in Cora's doorway, holding her like an offering. Cora took the child and laid her on the cot beside her own. She didn't ask questions, but that night the air inside the cabin felt heavier, like grief had a weight. Not all the neighbors came with thanks. Some came with pride bent into anger. Reverend Mathers called it unnatural. He said the curve defied sense, that warmth belonged in square homes, not pagan circles. "You built it like a devil's drum," he snapped, standing outside in a cloak too thin for the cold. "Even the way you sealed the gaps. No man should know how to hold heat that way. The wind's supposed to come through, to test us. You sealed it out." "I sealed it out because it kills children," Cora answered flatly. That shut him up. He didn't return, but the rumor began that her warmth was bought in some crooked way, that the Apache who'd taught her cursed the land, that she'd made a deal in grief. Still, no one stayed away when the worst storm came. It started with a groan in the sky, low and stretched like a board cracking under weight. The snow came sideways, white, thick, blinding. The wind shrieked, roofs peeled, trees broke, chimneys caved. By dusk, 7 families had clawed their way up to the ridge, faces blistered, dragging children and sacks and bundles. They didn't ask. They didn't speak. Cora opened her round door and let them in. That night, 23 people slept inside a cabin built for 4, and still, somehow no one froze. The warmth held. The heat wrapped them in silence, thick and real as fur. Children slept without coughing. Old men didn't shiver. And in the dark, Cora sat awake beside her stove, listening, not to the wind, to the breath of the living. By dawn, the ridge looked like a burial mound. Drifts crested up past the windows. The wind had packed snow tight against the rounded walls like a second shell. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, firestone, and damp wool. But it was warm, more than warm. It was the only place in 30 miles where men's fingers still moved without pain. And in that air, amid the shifting weight of sleeping bodies and shared silence, something began to change. Not in the walls or the stove, but in the people. Children who'd gone silent from cold began whispering. A man who hadn't spoken since losing his son in the fire, Griggs, stirred and pulled a stranger's child against him for warmth. A girl with frostburn on her nose asked Cora if they'd died, and this was heaven. Cora didn't answer. She just ladled another spoonful of stew from the pot she'd buried beside the stovestone hours earlier. The heat had cooked it slow, thick, rich with what little she had left. Beans, salt pork, a handful of wild onions from the dried rack, and marrow scraped from bones the dog hadn't finished. When she handed the bowl to the girl, the child cried into it, and Cora realized then none of these people had come to her. They had come to the heat, the round heat, the unshakable warmth, and now they looked at her like she was the warmth. That morning the men began asking how, not why she built it that way, but how, what she did first, where the rocks came from, how deep she buried the base ring, why there were no windows, what kind of mud she used to chink the joints. She answered flatly, without pride. The rocks were sandstone from the canyon's dry creek bed, shaped by water already. The mud was half clay, half straw, mixed wet, then left to dry, then mixed again. No nails, just pressure and interlock. The stove was its own mystery, a shape, not a machine, heat that curved, air that moved slow like breath. She didn't understand it fully, but the man who showed her, the old one, the one the town hated, he had understood. They asked about him. She just said, "He taught me how to build like it mattered more than I did." The third day brought death. An ox, still yoked, frozen stiff in a drift beside its own cart. Inside the cart, 2 bodies, a woman and a boy bundled together, mouths open in a scream that never came. A hunter named Reeves found them while trying to dig out a buried neighbor's chimney. He came back to the ridge with eyes full of ghosts and sat on the ground until someone put a blanket over him. That night, Cora kept the fire going instead of letting it smolder. She used the last of her stacked wood, then her kindling, then a piece of the cot frame. The flame inside the round stove roared for the first time in days. The heat thickened and spread, too strong to touch the stone nearby. She could feel the heat vibrating through the packed earth. It pulsed up into her bones like music, and yet part of her hated it, because now they expected her to be the flame. By the 5th day, the weather broke. The wind quieted. The snow stopped falling, and the light outside turned from dead white to a dull, bruised grey. The people stirred. They whispered about returning to their homes, about finding what hadn't collapsed. Cora stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching them, her face unreadable. She had spent months being mocked, then forgotten. Now they looked at her like a thing they needed. Not a woman, not a widow, but a source, a warm-blooded stove with a name. Reverend Mathers showed up again, as if nothing had happened. He tried to lead a prayer. "Lord, "We thank you for your provision." Cora cut him off with a voice that cracked like a whip. "You didn't come during the storm." His mouth opened, then shut. "You called it a devil's drum," she continued. "Said warmth was supposed to be earned through hardship. I was misled. No, Reverend, you were comfortable. You thought your fire would hold." No one said anything. The only sound was the hiss of heat in the stone. She let it hang in the air like smoke, then turned back to her children. The Reverend stepped back and left. He never returned. 2 nights later, the roof began to leak, not badly, just a slow drip above the sleeping corner. The snow outside had begun to melt, and that meant the shingles, bark, and pitch were warping. Cora went outside with a blanket over her shoulders and climbed onto the roof alone. The wind still bit. The snow crunched hard under her boots. She pulled the bark shingles loose, laid new ones from the storage pile she'd kept under a tarp. Her fingers bled, cracked from the cold. She looked out over the valley. Smoke no longer rose from most cabins. The roofs had caved in. Walls leaned. They wouldn't last another storm. She knew it then. It wasn't over. The others began asking to rebuild, not just copy her cabin, but rebuild their homes in her shape. They wanted her help. "We'll trade," one man said. "You teach us the method. We'll give meat, tools, fabric, whatever you need." But she didn't want trade. She wanted to know, would they listen this time? So she gave them one test. She told them to bring her mud. Not just any mud, but clay-rich soil with straw mixed in. Let sit for 3 days. Then stirred again. She gave exact instructions. Only 2 families brought what she asked. The rest brought half-wet slop or dry dirt or gave up entirely. Cora shook her head. "You don't want to build a home. You want me to save you again." They left angry. A week passed. Then 2. The snow melted into glassy sludge, then froze again. Children fell sick. The Griggs girl, the one she'd taken in, got a fever and nearly died. Cora didn't sleep that night. She built a second stove, smaller but the same shape. She put it beside the girl's cot. Let the heat circle her like an embrace. The girl lived. And after that, people stopped asking for stoves. They asked if she would build one. They asked what it would cost. They asked like supplicants, not neighbors. Spring came late. The valley was scarred. Of the 30 cabins that once dotted the land, only 12 still stood. 5 had burned. 8 collapsed. And only one, the round one, had stayed warm enough to carry 4 children, 2 widowers, and 7 strays through the worst storm in a decade. People called it the miracle circle. Others called it witchcraft, but Cora didn't care what they called it. She planted onions beside the stove's runoff pipe where the soil never froze. She started mixing more mud. She told her children, "We're not moving. This house held us, so now we build more." The next cabin she built wasn't for her. It was for the Griggs girl. She laid the foundation with her own hands, taught the girl how to mix clay, how to lay stones in a curve, how to breathe warmth into walls. The girl worked without complaint, her fingers calloused, her arms grew strong. It took months. But by the time the summer sun came high enough to dry the riverbeds, the second round cabin stood. People came up to see it. They didn't laugh. They asked how. They asked when. They offered to pay. And Cora just said, "Start with a circle. Then ask yourself if what you're building is for cold or for the living." The round cabin was no longer a curiosity by the time summer wore on, and the sun cracked open the canyon floor. It had become a quiet legend, a place where warmth had refused to die, where children had not frozen, where no beam had split, no wall had caved, no ember had leapt out and turned family into ash. But Cora did not rest. She kept her hands busy because she knew the cold would come again. She had learned not to wait for mercy. By the time the creek dried to a trickle, and the cottonwoods wore a coat of dust, Cora had drawn plans, not on paper, but in her head. 6 more cabins, all round, all close enough to share warmth if needed. People offered her coin, gold, silver, even a rifle, but she wasn't selling a cabin. She was building a pattern, and she made it clear. If you wanted her help, you laid every stone yourself. At first, the volunteers were few. A young widow with twins, Margaret Ellers, was the first to take up a shovel. Her old house had collapsed in the storm, her roof buckling under snow. While she screamed for help, no one could hear. Her boys survived only because she buried them under the floorboards and lay across the trapdoor for 3 days. Cora didn't pity her. She handed her a pickaxe. Margaret never missed a day of work after that. She bled, she limped, she swore at the sun, but she kept coming. Next came Daniel Fry, the only blacksmith left in the valley. His forge had frozen solid in January. His lungs still wheezed from it. He couldn't swing like he used to, so he hauled stone, pulled it in a wheelbarrow made from old wagon wheels and fence boards. Others followed, a few at first, then more. Not everyone stayed. Some broke under the labor. Some balked when they saw there was no blueprint, no nails, no lumber frames, just stone, sweat, and Cora's voice saying, "That one doesn't fit, try again." But by harvest, 3 more round cabins stood, each one more solid than the last, and something strange began to happen. happen. The heat returned. Even before snow, even before the nights turned sharp and the frost kissed the pumpkins, you could feel it. Those cabins held warmth, not like a stove does, not with flame or smoke or glowing iron, but something deeper, a slow, steady radiance. Cora explained it simply. The stone remembered. It soaked up summer and gave it back all winter long. When someone asked why round worked better than square, she cupped her hands and blew into them. "Now try that into a box," she said. "See how long the heat stays." It wasn't science, but it was truth. In town, they began calling it the Circle Row. At first, the name was a sneer, then it was envy, then it was hope, because that second winter came early and hard. Before the leaves fell, snow dusted the ridge. The winds returned, sharper, stranger, like the cold had learned from last year's loss and come back wiser. By November, 4 square cabins had collapsed under ice. A boy died of fever. An elder man froze to his chair in the night, pipe still between his teeth. But the round cabins stood, and this time they were ready. Cora had taught the others her fireless trick. Bury hot coals deep inside the stone stove's belly, cap it, let it smolder. No smoke, no flame, just trapped heat. A slow pulse that moved through walls like breath. She showed them how to angle the roof to spill snow, how to place vents low to draw fresh air without stealing warmth, how to use heavy wool curtains not across windows, they had none, but across beds, to keep warmth in the body. Space. She showed them how to listen for warmth, not feel it. Listen. You could hear it in a round cabin, a low hum beneath your feet, a soft echo in your chest. The wind still howled outside, but inside the circle it couldn't catch. That winter, more people came. Not neighbors, but strangers. Men who'd traveled through the mountain pass and seen smoke from chimneys that weren't choked with frost. Families who'd heard rumor of a place where no one froze last winter. Some came with children, others came wounded, and Cora let them in, so long as they worked. She refused no one who would lay stone, even when the men looked at her with suspicion, even when women whispered behind her back. She let them whisper. She watched their hands. A man who worked with cold hands, cracked lips, and tired eyes was worth more than one who offered gold. She had no use for gold. You couldn't eat it, you couldn't burn it, it couldn't block the wind, but a well-fit stone, that was a promise. By the time the first true blizzard hit in December, there were 7 round cabins on the ridge. The storm struck fast, too fast for town to prepare. Ice rain froze door hinges shut. The wind pulled shingles like teeth from the square roofs. People tried to escape, but the roads were gone, buried in snow that stuck like cement. One boy tried to run to Cora's ridge in the whiteout. They found him 3 days later, less than 50 feet from his own barn. His boots were full of blood, his hands frozen around a broken stick, like he'd tried to dig his way down. After that, the valley sent for Cora. The letter came scrawled in coal ink on torn cloth. "Please, we were wrong. Help us build the circles." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was Reverend Mather's. Cora stared at it for a long time. Then she burned it, not out of hate, but because it didn't matter who begged. It mattered who showed up. The next morning, she left her cabin early and walked into the frozen valley with a sack of stone tools and 3 of her children following behind. She didn't speak to anyone. She just stood in the square of town, in front of the collapsed church, and set her pack down. Then she knelt, placed a single round stone on the ice, and began drawing a circle in the snow. A wide one, a perfect one, wide enough for 10 people to sleep inside, 2 stoves, and a future. No one moved at first. Then Margaret stepped forward, then Fry, then others. Someone handed her a spade. Someone else began hauling rocks. By dusk, 20 people were digging, and Cora's voice was the only one giving orders. By February, the new cabin stood, not on her ridge, but in the heart of the valley. They called it the hearth, not because of a stove, but because it held everyone. It became the school, the shelter, the place where newborns first felt warmth. It was built by the hands of those who once called her mad, and they no longer mocked the shape. Cora never bragged, but she knew the shape was older than her, older than the town, older than the settlers who thought square walls made them civilized. She'd once asked the old Apache why his people built round homes. He didn't answer. He just held up his hand, palm open. "All things that last are round," he said. "The sun, the moon, the earth, your eyes, your mother's womb, the breath in your chest." And now, her children lived inside that breath. Winter ended without announcing itself. No fanfare, no final blizzard. Just a slow retreat. The wind lost its voice. The snow turned slushy at the edges. The creek began to murmur again under brittle ice. One morning, Cora opened her round cabin's door and smelled dirt instead of frost. The ridge didn't cheer. No one danced or shouted. They just stepped outside and looked around, blinking into the pale thaw, wondering how they'd made it. 12 families had wintered in circle cabins this time. Only one child fell ill, and he survived. No deaths, no fires, no roof collapses. It was quiet victory. The town below had not fared the same. Square cabins bore the marks of cold like scars. Some had buckled inward, the pressure of snow forcing walls to lean and bend until nails gave up. Others had simply dried out too hard, beams cracking with the sudden temperature shift. 2 more families had been lost, one to a stove chimney collapse, the other to a fire sparked from hasty repairs. And yet something deeper than disaster had shifted. The square no longer held authority, not in structure, not in minds. The valley had seen what lasted. Cora did not celebrate. She started working. She drew circles in dirt again, bigger ones now. 2 were meant to be barns. 1 was to be a gathering hall. Others came to help without being asked. Fry brought a team of boys who had never seen a round stone laid. Cora let him teach them. Margaret now led a team of widows. Even the oldest among them worked, wrapping clay, turning straw, tending to the stone fires that kept their mortar soft through the last cold weeks. By early spring, 4 more cabins rose, and with each one, Cora's role changed. She was no longer the sole voice. She became the root, not the crown, a part of the whole, not its master. They still looked to her, but now they built with her, not under her, and she led them. Because she'd never wanted to be a leader, she had only ever wanted to stay warm. That spring, new settlers came through the pass. Refugees, mostly, families who had tried to push deeper west, found nothing but rock, and now returned starving and ragged. They arrived expecting the same reception they'd seen in other valleys. Cold shoulders, tight mouths, closed doors. But here, they found something different. A ring of warm homes, open doors, no corners, children that didn't cough blood. They found the woman who had built the first circle, and Cora didn't ask who they'd been. She asked only what they could carry, what they could haul, what they could build. One man, Eldon Wex, claimed to be a trained engineer from back east, said he'd built bridges and towers, had diagrams and measurements. He offered to improve her cabins, offered blueprints, angles, chimneys with patented airflow. Cora let him speak. Then she gave him a shovel and told him to start on the drainage trench. He left 3 days later, said it was madness, said the structures were cultural curiosities that would collapse in time. That spring, a freak frost hit 2 towns east, killed 30 in one night. The round cabins held. Eldon never returned. One day in April, Reverend Mathers came back. He walked up the ridge on foot, holding his hat in both hands, trembling with the weight of something unsaid. His coat was patched, his face drawn. He didn't bring a Bible. Cora met him at the circle hearth where children now gathered each morning. He didn't speak right away. "I buried 7 this winter," he finally said. "3 were children." Cora nodded, not unkindly. "I tried to build one," he said. "A round cabin. I followed your steps. What happened? I rushed, cut corners, used pine instead of stone." Cora almost smiled. "No corners to cut in a circle," she said softly. The Reverend's eyes filled. He bowed his head. "Can I help now? You already are." That summer was the first one without any outbound wagon funerals. The circle community expanded. Not just homes now, root cellars, smokehouses, storage huts. All round, all built with bare hands and sun-dried mud, clay rich and strong as baked brick. Cora's children grew fast. Her eldest Nora began drawing her own floor circles. By autumn, she'd built her own hut entirely solo. At night, the ridge glowed with firelight that pulsed behind thick, round walls like lanterns buried in earth. And still Cora did not claim credit. The Apache man who taught her, long gone now, maybe dead, had once said something she now whispered often to her children. "Shape teaches, not the builder." She believed that. Then came the fire, not in the ridge homes, but in the valley, in the church. A dry summer, brittle wood, a spark from a cooking fire too close to the wall. It went up like kindling. The steeple collapsed before anyone realized the blaze had started. No deaths, but the town was shaken. And then something unthinkable happened. The townspeople, those who had once mocked her, asked to move, not just learn her ways. They wanted to join, to leave their square cabins behind and rebuild up on the ridge, to live inside the circle. It wasn't a simple thing. Some on the ridge feared being overrun. They liked their quiet. They liked that they had earned the warmth with labor and frostbitten fingers, not begged for it when it was already built. But Cora stood in the center of the hearth hall and spoke calmly. "We survived because we didn't turn away the desperate," she said. "We built with them. Some people only learn after burning." And with that it was settled. The town would move, slowly, not all at once. One family at a time. Cora would help, but only if they built their own walls. The circle would not be a gift. It had to be earned. By the time fall returned, the ridge was no longer just a cluster of survivors. It was a new kind of village, a ring of circles. The air itself felt different there. No straight roads, no right angles, just paths that curved, cabins that turned wind into silence, stoves that hummed rather than cracked. They planted crops in rings, dug wells in spirals. Even the children played differently, rolling in arcs, drawing endless loops in the dirt instead of boxes. Cora sometimes sat on the low rise beyond her own home and watched them, silent. She felt no pride, just peace, a kind of rest she'd never known before. Because for once, she didn't have to fear the wind. She didn't have to brace against it. She'd shaped something that could take its worst and still hold, and so had they. The third winter came early and cruel, sharper than the last. Snow began falling before the last tomatoes ripened, before the summer beds were fully cleared, before the earth had fully cooled. But no one panicked. On the ridge, and now down through the newly curved paths of the spreading village, the cabins held, all round, all thick-walled, all quietly defiant. They didn't brace for the storm, they welcomed it, like warriors who had finally learned how to stand still while the enemy struck and not flinch. Children now helped bank fires inside the round stoves with practiced hands. Women sealed doors with sod-packed blankets. Men cleared the snow from the runoff trenches that ringed each home like moats. No one waited for Cora to give the first move. They already knew what to do. Cora didn't lead the ridge anymore. She watched it. She repaired tools, taught stone shaping to children, showed newcomers how to listen to the hum of the stove. She never held counsel, never told anyone what they owed her. It wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the circle now. Even those who came late, families who once scorned her, travelers who'd abandoned her ways after the storm passed, even a few who once called her delusional, they were welcome now. If they laid stone, they were family. That had always been the only rule. By midwinter, a child from the east arrived alone. A girl, maybe 8, frost-bitten cheeks, hands wrapped in rags, boots that weren't hers. She couldn't say where her family had gone, couldn't remember her last name. Cora found her at the tree line, curled in the snow like a dropped doll, and carried her into her home. The girl didn't cry when she woke. She just stared at the low, round ceiling and whispered, "It's warm." Cora nodded. "You're safe now." The girl's arrival wasn't rare. More came that winter. Wanderers, orphans, families torn from burned wagons or buried, shacks, and the ridge took them in, because the circle grew, not with buildings, but with belonging. One by one, the new cabins rose, not because of Cora, but because everyone now knew how. They didn't need blueprints. They didn't need lumber orders or architects. They needed firestone, mud, strong backs, and memory. The shape had become instinct, a heartbeat. The snow never truly let up that winter. It came in waves, melting briefly, then returning with blinding speed. Ice glazed the trees. Wolves came closer to the cabins than ever before, but they never breached the ring. Dogs barked, fires flared, and inside the walls, families sat in warmth. Not just warmth of heat, but of design. They knew the shape. They trusted it now, not because of faith or superstition, but because it had proven itself. One night in January, a sudden gale tore down through the canyon, shaking the valley floor so hard it cracked the frozen creek. Wind slammed into the cabins with the force of falling timber. Old square homes, those few still standing, now used for grain or animals, buckled instantly. But not a single round cabin lost a roof, not a door, not a chimney stone, not a child. The next morning, they gathered on the ridge, all of them. Cora stood among them, shoulders wrapped in deer hide, face half-shadowed by the low sun. The people didn't cheer. They stood in silence, letting the wind howl past them, harmless now. Then a child began to hum. It wasn't a song anyone had taught her, just a circular rhythm, rising, falling, repeating, like the slow breath of fire inside stone. Others joined. No one planned it. The hum became the heartbeat of the ridge. Spring came late again. When it did, the ridge didn't just thaw. It bloomed. Someone had sown clover between the cabins. Others planted herbs beside the runoff drains, where warmth still radiated from the stone bases. Children rolled hoops down the circular paths. Chickens nested in round coops. The village no longer had a name like Ridge or Fork or Valley Hollow. They simply called it the Ring, and outsiders began hearing of it. One day, a group of men from the capital arrived on horseback, surveyors and land agents. They wore spectacles and stiff coats, carried books and legal maps. They asked who was in charge. No one answered. They asked again. A child pointed at a round stove. "She is," he said, grinning. The men scoffed. They asked to speak with the builder. Margaret stepped forward, arms streaked with clay. "So, you're the architect?" they asked. "No, just the student." "Of whom?" She pointed at Cora, who was crouched nearby, fitting a small stone into a chimney wall with a 10-year-old. "That woman?" one man scoffed. "She's not a registered mason. She's not licensed. These aren't proper buildings." Margaret looked him in the eye. "Every child in this village can build one. Every family survived the freeze. How many licenses is that?" Worth? The men had no answer. They left by dusk, and no one ever saw them again. Years passed. The ring didn't grow fast. It grew right. Each new cabin was laid by the people who would live in it. Each one took time, sweat, patience. The people didn't rush. Cora grew older. Her hands bent, her voice softened, but her eyes still scanned every curve of stone, every line of packed clay. She taught more than building. She taught that cold is not an enemy to be hated, but a force to be respected. That the wind isn't cruel, it simply looks for weakness. And you don't fight the wind with walls, you move around it. You build shaped like stillness. In the last winter of her life, Cora didn't lift a stone. She sat by the main hearth, now a large circle hall, and listened to the children teach each other. They had names for the parts of the cabin now. The wind wall, the memory hearth, the echo curve. Things she'd never called them. Things they had learned. And when a new family came from the north, faces gaunt, clothes worn, eyes pleading, they were met by a girl of 12. "Come on," she said, taking the woman's hand. "We'll show you how to start. First you draw the circle." Not Cora, her students. That spring, Cora passed quietly in her sleep. No storm, no pain, just breath that went still. They buried her in the center of the original circle, beneath the hearthstone of her first cabin. No marker, just a round ring of stones laid around the mound, packed with the same clay she once mixed with her hands. And every spring, when the snow melted, clover grew first there. Always there, the circle holding her warmth, even now. In time, stories would spread about a mother who built a home with no corners, and taught others to trap warmth in stone, about cabins that stood while all others fell, about a shape that saved lives, not with magic, not with invention, but with patience and sweat and stone. Some would call it myth, but those who felt that warmth, even once, would never forget it. Because warmth is not just heat, it's memory. And memory, when shaped right, can outlast winter, can outlast everything.